If you don't start all your stories with once upon a time, are you even a good writer?
Boing boing. Hey guys, it's Zuri and I'm back with another video. Welcome to episode 2 of the Remake Chronicles. Today we are going to talk about how to write a webcomic specifically for Webtoon. Every webcomic writer is going to have a different process depending on the genre of their comic as well as the platform that they're uploading their comic on. For me, because I'm uploading to Webtoon, I have to take into account how the webcomic is going to look on the platform when it's uploaded and when readers are looking at it on their phone or on their laptop. It's helpful to keep this in mind even in the early stages, but it's also important to remember that your process might change. When I originally wrote We Never Happened, when I look at the process of how I made it at the time, which was like 2 years ago now, wow. When I think about how I used to format it, it's a lot different than how I'm going about it now. At the time, what I did was I wrote down everything in like a script format in a notebook. So whenever a character spoke or whenever like there was a shot, like I would visualize it in my brain. And I would use certain terms like wide shot, close up, like the types of abbreviations and words used in screenplays. Because it's visual, right? Comics are very visual, so for me, it was helpful to like think about it in that way. So we're seeing a very close-up shot on this character, we're seeing a wide shot on this character, and I still do that now. I wrote everything down in a notebook, and then when I was done with that, I would draw using a pencil and a piece of paper. Obviously, I would just draw into a little notepad. I would draw out each panel in each page, and then I would take a picture and upload that picture onto whatever drawing software I was using. I don't remember what I used at the time. I think I used partially Photoshop and partially an app on my tablet. I don't remember the name of the app. I think I might have mentioned it in a past video. I would trace my drawing over in Photoshop or whatever app, and then I would color it, and then it would be done. Now my process is going to look a lot different. Today I'm going to show you kind of how I am going about developing the story. I'm not going to go into what the story is, but more so how I am working on writing it. And then from there on in other episodes, I'll get to like how I will go about, drawing and stuff. But for me, this time around, I'm just going to be doing basically everything on my laptop, writing, drawing, everything. I'm not really going to be writing anything by hand or drawing anything by hand. So let's get into the story aspect and how I want to go about formatting the story. For me, the biggest thing when it comes to writing a story, specifically for Webtoon, is the panel. I think that's one of the major things that, is talked about or is looked at in relation to Webtoon creation. You can have as many panels as you want for a specific story, but it's noted that certain types of stories have different panels. So I found this article by S. Marishita Studio, and in this article they have a chart where they kind of outline based on genre how many panels that webcomic would have. So action has 60 panels, fantasy has 50, sci-fi has 70, romance has 40, drama has 50, comedy has 30, and thriller has 60. And the chart is labeled rough Webtoon panel estimation. So if you don't know, a panel is just an image. It's just one image of your Webtoon. So that can be like a box with a character's facial expression, or it could be a scene, it could be an establishing shot of a place. I'll put up some examples of what a panel is. But there can be more than one panel per page. Usually there might be 2 to 3 panels per page. For me, when it comes to writing this story, it's very helpful to plan in terms of panels. So how many panels is this going to have, and how can I plan out the story to fit in this amount of panels. So I've pretty much written out the entirety of episode 1. And I have that in front of me here. I may or may not show it. But before I get into like how I got to planning out episode 1, because there are a couple things that I want to get into in terms of like story beats and panels and certain things, I do want to mention that I'm using a specific app called Milanote. This video is not sponsored by Milanote. I just happened to find this app and I find it very useful in terms of planning. But you can use just about anything. You could even write this by hand and not even need to use an app, but I just find it easy to use an app. I like Milanote because you can create little notes that are in these boxes and then you can connect them. And you can also have boards where there are different sections and different like areas that you can go into. This is really starting to sound like a sponsored ad, but I promise you it's not. I just really like the setup of Milanote, and because a webcomic is a very visual thing, it's really helpful for me to have a very visual way of planning out the story. So how did I plan out episode 1? I started with a very broad scope of what I wanted the entire story to look like. So from beginning to end, how do I want the entirety of the remake for We Never Happened to look like? I started with a basic timeline of everything that happens. Well, actually, now that I look at it, I realize I didn't get to the very end, but I have the part 1 done. You know, if you read Webtoon, it's often released in parts or seasons, so you'll have season 1, then you'll have season 2 and onwards for as long as the story goes. I think instead of releasing seasons, I'll release it in parts, or I'll call it like parts. So I have beginning to end of part 1, and I have the beginning, most of the beginning / middle of part 2. I haven't really gotten to the end of what part 2 is. So for this, I found it helpful to use a plot diagram, essentially, not to make one, because I could easily recreate one in Milanote, but just using that as a guide. So I'll put it up here, but basically a plot diagram outlines everything that happens in the story. So first you have your setting and you have your very basic setup. You have the exposition. Where are we? Who are our characters? Like an introduction to the world, essentially. And then you have your rising action. So what are the things that have happened that leads to the climax? This is like the turning point in the story. This is where things get dramatic, things get real, things are getting spicy. And then you have your falling action where things are cooling down a little, and eventually you get to your resolution. So this is basically like a very broad scope of what a story is. And this can be the broad scope of your overall story from the very first episode that you upload to the very last episode that is ever uploaded. But each episode might be one of these things. Like one episode might be just for exposition. Another episode might be just the first falling action, the first thing that happens that creates a bit of conflict. So for me, I just set up everything that I wanted to happen in part 1. The inciting incident, which is what happens that shakes up the characters. So you have your characters just chilling in their world, being whoever they are, and then something happens. And that thing that happens starts everything else. It creates a chain reaction that, results in the climax and all of that fun stuff. It gets to, the spice, the reason why we're reading the story, right? Part 1 really ends with the climax of the entire story. At least this first arc of the story, and there might be other arcs. And that's the thing. Before I go on, like, what I've realized is that, or I actually read this somewhere, that each scene has a beginning, middle, end. Each scene kind of follows this plot diagram of inciting incident, climax, and resolution. But there's just kind of like mini things, right? Like Not every scene is going to have an amazing, like, mind-blowing plot twist climax, but each scene is going to have a little something that happens that moves the story along, a little peak that it's like, oh, okay, and then we move on, and, you know, it just keeps going like that. So for this overall story, there might be several beginning, middle, ends, several setup, climax, resolution type things that happens, right? So it's really important to set up what that will be for each scene and for each kind of thing that takes place. Also for every storyline that you have, because every comic might have different, like, plots. You know, you have your A plot and B plot and C plot sometimes. So it's really helpful to keep track of all of those things so that you kind of have a guideline and you know where you're going. So once I had an overview of everything that I wanted to happen in part 1, then I moved on to actually starting to write, starting with episode 1. And for episode 1, I came up with 5 story beats, or 5 main things that I wanted to happen. So I'll just give a very a vague description of what each of my story beats are so that you can get an idea. So the first story beat is that character A and character B are in the library, and character B is, you know, a very ditzy character. You know, she's really distracted and kind of all over the place. Character A is trying to tutor her, but character B is just not retaining anything. So character A is getting frustrated with character B, and the second story beat is that they get called for lunch, and, you know, they decide to go and meet up with their friends for lunch. So the friends are characters C and D. So characters A, B, C, and D are at lunch. That is our third story beat. So the 4 characters are at lunch, and then character A and character C get called to go to the gym to do a specific thing. So they get called away, and then we have story beat B when they're in the gym doing this specific thing. That is story beat 4. And story beat 5 is then character A meeting the main love interest, which let's say is character E. So those are the 5 main story beats. And it really depends on the story, how many beats you have. You could have 1, 2, and 3. But basically these beats are our beginning, middle, and end. Our setup, our climax, our resolution, with things happening in between. But again, they're like mini things that help to tell the larger story, which also has a beginning, middle, and end. So for each beat, I planned out every single image or every single panel that will be shown. Now for this specific story, each beat takes 10 panels. So 10 images for each beat. And just to give you an example of what my panels are, for example, you have the establishing shot of the library, you have the 2 characters sitting across from each other, you have a close-up on one of the characters talking, stuff like that. So it really depends on what your story is and what your art style is. It really depends on a lot of different factors how many panels will be for each beat. There could be 2 panels for each beat, depending. So all in all, episode 1 will have 50 panels, which is in line with the chart that I showed you from S. Marishita Studio, because this comic, technically, I want it to be like a dramedy romance, so drama, comedy, and romance. But it is really about the drama that's happening and the relationship between the characters. And according to the chart, drama is 50 panels, with romance being 40 and comedy being 30. 50 is it's 45, 30 or 35 would be in the middle range between all of those. But 50, because drama's the main thing, with romance and comedy also being in there, it makes sense for the comic to have 50 panels. But again, this might change per episode depending on what happens. But having a specific, like, number of panels that you want or number of story beats that you want per episode can really help you kind of narrow down things and, like, really focus on the main things that you want to happen. So for now, each episode might end up with 50 panels, and that would be okay. But it's also okay to not be so rigid with things. You know, it is good to have a structure, but what if something like a really specific imagery that you want or a really specific thing you want to happen takes more than 30 panels for one episode? Let's say everything else has been 30 panels, but this one episode needs more than 30 panels. That's totally fine. I think it's totally okay to morph things and change things as you go along. You don't have to stick to this. You also don't have to stick to what I'm telling you, right? You don't have to use Milanote. You don't have to plan out your stories in this way, but for me it's been really helpful because, as I mentioned in the last video that I did about, you know, remaking this comic, is that for me, if I don't have a specific place that I want things to go, like if I don't plan out things like this, if I just start writing with a burst of inspiration and I don't sit down and really figure out the logistics of it, then I'm gonna burn myself out and I'm just gonna, like, basically hit a wall and then not know where to go and then get discouraged. Whereas if I hit a wall while planning here, I'll give myself some time to think it through because I haven't, like, drawn or anything. I haven't uploaded or anything. You know, I feel a lot more at ease to just, like, continue thinking through the story versus if I had rushed and drawn a lot of things with a burst of inspiration, uploaded it, and then eventually I hit a wall and I'm like, I don't know where else to go with this. I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. But it's possible that you can, you know, do that. You can, like, draw the burst of inspiration, upload it, be fine, and, like, hit a wall, but overcome it and continue to draw. Like, everybody has a different process. This is just mine. So, as a brief recap, figure out the broad strokes of what you want for your story, beginning, middle, and end for the entire thing, or for the entire season, the entire part, what have you. And then, once you have that, break each episode down to also have beginning, middle, end, aka story beats. What happens for this part? What happens for this part? What happens for this part? Etc., etc. And then, once you have that, break each story beat down into panels. So this character looks up and they see a bird and then, you know, yada yada yada. So it's really about broad strokes, then specific to the episode, and then specific to each thing that happens in the episode. So yeah, that's just how I've been planning out this comic so far. And now what I want to do is start sketching my panels, and to make sure that visually it's looking like what I'm picturing and everything's kind of working and flowing the way that I want it to. And then after that, you move on to the next episode and it just kind of continues like that. And I don't know how many episodes I will want to make before I upload. I feel like I want to create each episode beginning to end, so like have all of these episodes just kind of living on my laptop for a while before I upload, but that might change. I might finish episode 1, love it, and decide to just go with it, and maybe by that point I'll have all of the episodes for part 1 done, or most of the episodes for part 1 already planned out and stuff. So it really just depends how you want to do it. I know a lot of people write as they publish, which is good, it's fine. But I don't know if I want to write as I publish or if I want to have the story pretty much done, planned out before I publish, if that makes sense. So know where I want to go with everything and like basically have the ending written. If it's not like completely written, just like know how I want everything to end and then decide to go with it. I don't know. It really depends. So yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at right now. I have started kind of drawing one of the characters, but character designing is another big part of it that it's a bit of a beast. But, you know, you got to do it. You got to get to it at some point. So character designing is the next big portion that I will tackle, and I'll probably do several videos about character designs. But the characters are designed in my head. Just a matter of putting them onto digital paper. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you are a webtoon writer, creator who has also, done this, has any tips, tricks for me and for everyone else that might find this video, please feel free to comment it. This is all about experimentation. I consider myself a beginner. I have only published one webtoon thus far, and I'm just doing this as a solo team too. This whole process would probably be completely different if I were working in a team of people. I think that's important to note, that when you're doing it all by yourself, it's a lot different than when you have a team of people. You have someone who's a writer, someone who's doing line art, someone who's doing coloring, someone who's doing the storyboarding, All of that process is going to be very different. So if you're a solo webtoon creator, or you are a webtoon writer who has written for comics before, leave any tips and tricks and helpful things in the comments. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye. No, I don't know if I like that outro. I usually do this as my outro, but I don't know if I like it anymore. But for now, bye-bye.